The church smelled faintly of lilac and old wood, the kind of scent that clings to the back of your throat and makes grief feel heavier than it already is. I sat in the third pew, dressed in a simple black dress I had pulled from the back of my closet, paired with plain flats. No flashy jewelry, no designer labels, just something respectful and quiet. That was the way Mom would have wanted it. She had always said funerals were for honoring the life lost, not for showing off, but, of course, my sister never believed that. Claudia swept in late as she always did, in a designer dress that shimmered under the stained glass light. Her heels clicked against the tile floor, announcing her presence before she even reached the front row. Relatives craned their necks to watch her pass, whispering about how stunning she looked even at a funeral. She wore grief like it was another accessory, dramatic enough to draw eyes. Careful enough not to smear her expensive mascara, I kept my head low, my fingers intertwined in my lap. I wasn't here to compare, wasn't here to put on a show. I was here to say goodbye to the only parent who ever truly understood me. The service ended in a haze. The priest's voice blurred into background noise while my thoughts drifted to Mom, her laugh, her gentle encouragement, the way she always told me, "You don't need to look like everyone else. You'll find your own way." Those words had carried me farther than anyone in this room could imagine, but reality snapped back when Claudia cornered me near the refreshment table in the church hall afterward. She had gathered a small audience, 2 aunts, a cousin, and one of Mom's old friends who still hung on Claudia's every word. Her eyes flicked up and down my outfit, and then her lips curled into that familiar sneer. "Seriously? This is what you wore to Mom's funeral?" She said, her voice loud enough to carry. The air shifted. Cups of coffee froze halfway to lips. My stomach tightened, but I kept my hands steady, clutching the paper cup in front of me. Claudia tilted her head dramatically. "I mean, black polyester? Flats from what? A discount store? You couldn't even try? Mom would be rolling in her grave if she saw you looking like this. You know she always hated when you dressed sloppy." My cheeks burned, though I knew Mom would never have cared about such things. But Claudia's words, sharpened by years of practice, cut deeper than they should have. The aunts tittered nervously, exchanging glances but not stepping in. One even muttered, "Well, she does have a point," which only added fuel to my sister's fire. "Look at me," Claudia continued, sweeping a manicured hand over her glittering dress. "This is how you honor someone. With dignity. With class. Not whatever this is." Her eyes scanned me again, and the audience's uncomfortable laughter followed. For a moment I considered snapping back. I could have crushed her with the truth, right then and there. I could have told her that the very flats she mocked were produced by one of my own companies, a global brand she probably bragged about wearing without ever realizing where they came from. I could have revealed that the plain black dress, simple as it looked, was cut from fabric sourced and perfected by my design labs, sold worldwide, admired by editors who whispered my name in awe, but I didn't, not yet. Instead, I smiled faintly and took a sip of my coffee. "Claudia," I said quietly, "it's a funeral, not a runway." Her eyes narrowed, her lips twisting as though I'd just spit in her champagne. She turned back to her audience, shaking her head. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "You've always embarrassed this family, always." The words hit harder than I let them show. I kept my face smooth, but inside old wounds split open. The years of being the overlooked daughter, the one they thought would never make anything of herself, came rushing back. I stayed silent, letting her bask in her petty triumph. Because she had no idea. No clue that the empire she worshipped every time she flipped through a glossy magazine or scrolled through a luxury site online was mine. No inkling that while she stood there in her rented designer dress, mocking me, I was quietly one of the richest self-made women in the country. And if Mom were watching, I knew she'd be proud not of what I built, but of the restraint I showed in that moment, because this was just the beginning. Claudia's words lingered like smoke, seeping into every memory I'd tried so hard to bury. As I stood in that church hall, still clutching the lukewarm cup of coffee, my mind slid backward because insults like hers weren't new. They were a pattern, a script she'd been reading from since we were children. Growing up, Claudia was the star. She had been born with glossy hair, porcelain skin, and that effortless charm that made adults coo and gush. Teachers adored her, neighbors fawned over her, relatives whispered about how she was destined for something great. She was the beautiful one, the charismatic one. And then there was me. I wasn't ugly, exactly, just invisible. Where Claudia sparkled, I blended in. Where she strutted, I stumbled. Family photos were proof of the imbalance, she in bright dresses, striking poses. Me shoved to the side in hand-me-downs, awkward and ignored. It wasn't that Mom didn't love me, she did. Fiercely, but she was often too busy juggling 2 jobs to referee the small cruelties that slipped between siblings. My father was absent long before he officially left. And Claudia quickly learned she could do no wrong in Mom's eyes, so long as she smiled sweetly after, but behind closed doors. She knew exactly how to cut me down. God. You have no sense of style. Why do you always look like a charity case? No wonder no one notices you. I'd hear these comments whispered while we got ready for school, or flung casually across the dinner table. To her, my plainness was an endless joke. To me, it became fuel, though at the time, I didn't know how to use it. By the time we were teenagers, the divide between us had solidified. Claudia was the queen bee of our high school, adored by boys, envied by girls, always dressed in the latest fashion our relatives helped her buy. I, on the other hand, spent weekends working part-time at the library or sketching designs in the margins of my notebooks. Clothes fascinated me, not the labels, not the flash, but the mechanics. How a seam could change the way someone walked. How fabric, when cut just right, could feel like armor or liberation. I never told anyone about my sketches. Not Claudia, not even Mom. It was my secret rebellion. My quiet world where I didn't need to compete for attention. After high school, Claudia was scooped up by a wealthy fiancé, and later another and another. She measured success in diamonds and cocktail parties, convinced she had won at life. I didn't attend most of her weddings or her divorces. By then, I had carved out my own path. One she couldn't fathom. I remember the day I left home with nothing but a duffel bag, $400 in my bank account, and a portfolio of designs no one had seen. Claudia had smirked at me as I packed. "You'll be back in a month," she said, sipping iced coffee with her sunglasses perched on her head. "Face it, you're not cut out for the real world. You can barely dress yourself." Those words burned, but instead of breaking me, they branded me. Every late night I spent sewing samples in a cramped apartment. Every time I walked into a meeting with investors who laughed me out of the room. Every rejection letter. Every condescending smile. I carried Claudia's voice with me like a ghost, and I made a silent vow I would prove her wrong. Even if it took my whole life. What she never knew, what none of them ever knew, was how much grit it took. They saw me as quiet, timid, invisible. They didn't see the long nights, the blisters on my hands from working machines, the sleepless hours spent studying markets, fabrics, distribution networks. They didn't see me pitch and fail, and pitch again. Until finally one pitch stuck. Then another. And then an empire was born, brick by brick. Stitch by stitch, I had become the very thing Claudia worshipped: wealth, status, power. But unlike her, I hadn't bought it through someone else's pocket. I built it, alone. And yet, standing in that church, listening to her mock me for polyester and flats, I realized with a cold twist in my gut that she still hadn't changed. After all these years, after all my battles and triumphs, Claudia still saw me as that awkward younger sister and hand-me-downs. The irony was delicious. Almost cruel, because while she mocked my clothes, she had no idea that half the luxury items she flaunted in her wardrobe shoes, handbags, dresses, had come from my factories. My designers, my vision. She was walking around draped in my work without ever realizing it, and maybe, I thought, staring at her as she basked in the shallow laughter of our relatives, maybe that was the sweetest revenge of all. As Claudia's laughter echoed in that church hall, I felt a strange calm settle over me. She didn't know none of them did. To them, I was still the overlooked sister in discount clothes, the one who never measured up. But behind the plain black dress, behind the quiet composure, lived a story none of them could even imagine. The truth was simple, but enormous. I had built an empire, not an inheritance. Not a lucky break, not some wealthy husband's checkbook. My empire had been born from sketches on yellowed notebook paper, from trial and error, from sweat and sleepless nights. I had founded a fashion and lifestyle company, though no one in this room would recognize the name attached to me. That was by design. Early on, I realized anonymity was my greatest asset. I wasn't glamorous enough to be the face of my own brand, but I didn't need to be. I understood fabrics, trends, and people in a way Claudia never could. I knew that fashion wasn't just about looking expensive, it was about creating desire, making people feel powerful when they slipped something over their shoulders. So I built a brand that spoke for itself. First came the handbags, sleek, functional, but stylish enough to catch attention. Then the shoes, then entire clothing lines. Within 5 years, my designs were gracing runways in Milan, Paris, New York. Editors whispered about the mysterious designer who never appeared at shows, who let the work shine instead of their ego. That designer was me. Investors called me lucky. Competitors called me untouchable. But I knew the truth. It wasn't luck, and I wasn't untouchable. It was grit. It was endless hours spent poring over logistics and margins. It was knowing when to gamble on a risky fabric, when to pull the plug on a failing collection. It was firing people I once called friends because the brand had to come first. The numbers told the story. Best, $2.4 billion. That was the valuation of my company the last time Forbes knocked on my door. I have brushed them off, declining the interview. I didn't need my face plastered on a magazine. I didn't need the world to know it was me. Fame wasn't the goal, control was. And yet, even as I sat on boards and signed international contracts, my family remained blissfully ignorant. Not because I had hidden it from them out of shame, but because they never bothered to ask. To Claudia, I was always invisible, unworthy of curiosity. And to the rest of them, I was simply the quiet one. They didn't notice when I stopped showing up at holidays, didn't question the increasingly rare phone calls. My absence only confirmed their assumption that I had amounted to nothing. It used to sting. Now, I found it almost liberating. Still, there was an irony that never failed to make me smile. Claudia, the self-proclaimed fashionista, worshipped at the altar of my brand without ever knowing it. The heels she had worn to her second wedding? Mine? The handbag she flaunted on Instagram last Christmas? Mine. Even the sparkling cocktail dress she wore to the funeral? Yes. The one she had just lorded over me had been stitched together in one of my factories. She was literally wearing my empire on her back, while mocking me for polyester, and I let her. Because power isn't always about announcing who you are. Sometimes power is in the silence, in knowing something others don't, in watching them underestimate you, again and again while you hold all the cards. But that day, as I stood in the church hall with grief heavy on my chest, I felt a flicker of conflict. Part of me wanted to remain invisible forever, to let Claudia drown in her own ignorance. The other part of me, the part still stung by her words, by years of belittlement, wanted to peel back the curtain, to show her, once and for all, who I had become. The opportunity came faster than I expected. As the crowd began to thin, a man approached me. He was sharply dressed, middle-aged, the kind of person who radiated wealth and importance. I recognized him instantly. He was one of my company's earliest investors. Someone who had bet on me when everyone else laughed me out of the room. "Excuse me," he said warmly, gripping my hand. "I just wanted to say how sorry I am for your loss. Your mother was a wonderful woman." I nodded, gratitude swelling in my chest. Before I could respond, he glanced at Claudia, then back at me and smiled knowingly. "And if I may add, you look just like your mother when you're working the room." I knew I recognized you, even out of uniform. Our little empire builder. The words slipped out casually, but they were a spark tossed into dry grass. Claudia's head snapped toward me, her painted lips parting in confusion. "Empire builder?" she repeated, her voice sharp. The room went quiet, and in that silence, I realized the truth was about to come crashing into her. Perfect. Shallow world. The investor's words still hung in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Our little empire builder. Claudia's eyes narrowed at me, confusion swirling with suspicion. For a moment she laughed, shrill, dismissive. Empire builder? Oh, please. You must be confusing her with someone else. The investor raised his brows, glancing between us. No, no mistake. I'd recognize her anywhere. You don't forget the face of someone who turned a startup into a multi-billion-dollar company. One of the best decisions I ever made was backing her when no one else would. His words hit the room like a stone through glass. Conversations faltered. Aunts who had been gossiping fell silent mid-sentence. Even the clatter of coffee cups seemed to stop. Every pair of eyes turned toward me and Claudia. She looked at me as if I had sprouted wings. You, she stammered, her voice cracking. What is he talking about, you? You can't be serious. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch, watching her unravel. I had held my tongue for years, but grief has a way of stripping down your patience, of reminding you what matters and what doesn't, and Claudia's cruelty, here of all places, felt like a final straw. Why don't you explain, dear? The investor said kindly, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. This is your story, after all. I could have brushed it off. I could have smiled and walked away, keeping my secret intact. But Claudia had pushed too far. And maybe, just maybe, Mom would have wanted me to stop letting myself be treated like less. I set down the coffee cup. My voice was calm, steady, almost too calm. He's talking about the company I built. The one you brag about wearing all over your Instagram. The brand you worship, Claudia. It's mine. Her face twisted in disbelief. No, you're lying. That's impossible, you? You can barely put an outfit together. You expect me to believe you're... What, some hidden CEO? She laughed again, but the edges of her laughter wavered, desperate. One of the cousins piped up hesitantly. Actually, I think I've seen her name in an article. About a designer who never shows her face. The room shifted. Murmurs rippled. Aunts leaned closer, whispering, piecing together fragments they'd ignored all these years. Claudia's cheeks flushed red, her confidence crumbling. If this is true, she spat, then why dress like that? She gestured at me, disdain dripping from her voice. If you're so rich, so powerful, why show up looking like you crawled out of a bargain bin? That was the heart of it, wasn't it? To Claudia, worth was measured in labels and glitter. I met her gaze, steady and unblinking. Because I don't need clothes to prove who I am. I don't need to wear wealth on my skin for people to know my value. That's the difference between us, Claudia. You wear other people's names? I built mine. The words hung heavy, final. And for once she had no quick retort. The tension in the room thickened, nearly suffocating. Some of the relatives avoided my eyes, ashamed of how easily they'd laughed along with her earlier. Others looked at me with new curiosity, even awe. Claudia stood frozen, as though the foundation of her entire identity had been shaken, but she wasn't finished, not yet. You think this makes you better than me? She hissed, her voice sharp and trembling. So what if you built a company? You'll always be the little sister who embarrassed this family. You'll always be nothing without us. Her words stabbed at old wounds, but this time they didn't sink in. Not like before. I had built something she could never touch, and I didn't need her validation. I smiled faintly. Funny, because without me, you wouldn't even have the clothes on your back. A hush fell, colder than any winter draft. Claudia's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her hand twitched toward her glittering dress, as though she wanted to rip it off her skin. The silence stretched long, until someone in the back coughed. Breaking the spell, that was when I realized something. Claudia had always thrived on control of the narrative. Control of how others saw me. But the moment she lost that control, she had nothing. And in that moment, she wasn't the glamorous sister anymore. She was just small, and me? For the first time, I didn't feel small at all. The room still hummed with a stunned silence, broken only by the faint clinking of cups and the shuffle of restless feet. Claudia's face was a portrait of denial, eyes wide, lips pressed tight, nostrils flaring like a cornered animal. For once, she had no clever insult, no smug comeback, but she wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. This is ridiculous, she snapped finally, her voice brittle. She's lying. She has to be lying. Look at her. She doesn't look like someone who owns whatever company you're talking about. The investor beside me chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, I assure you, she's the real thing. You're wearing one of her dresses right now. I'd know that cut anywhere. It's one of the pieces from her fall collection. Gasps erupted around us. One of my aunts even reached out and touched Claudia's sleeve, her eyes widening as if the fabric itself had betrayed the secret. Claudia recoiled. No, that's not true. She looked down at her dress as if it might start burning her skin. This is from Montreve. Everyone knows Montreve is Parisian, exclusive, there's no way. It is Parisian, I said softly, my voice calm, deliberate. Because I built it that way. I founded Montreve 10 years ago. I designed the first line myself. You've been worshipping my work for years, Claudia, without even knowing it. Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, closed it, then laughed nervously, as though the sound could stitch her unraveling dignity back together. No, you're trying to humiliate me. This is some sick game. I leaned closer, my voice low but cutting through the room like glass. The sick game is that you've spent your whole life tearing me down for how I looked, while you've been draping yourself in my success like it was your birthright. Every bag you flaunted, every dress you twirled in, every pair of heels you bragged about on Instagram, mine, I made them. And you didn't even know. The whispers around us swelled into a storm. Relatives exchanged looks, piecing together years of absence, years of assumptions. The cousin who had spoken earlier muttered, I knew I recognized her name. While an aunt shook her head in disbelief, Claudia's breathing grew shallow, her carefully crafted poise slipping with every second. You think this makes you better than me? She spat, her voice trembling. You think money and some brand makes you important? I held her gaze, steady, unflinching. No, what makes me important is that I built it myself. Without shortcuts. Without handouts. While you were busy chasing husbands and calling me worthless, I was working. And now, the very empire you used to prop yourself up belongs to me. Her hand flew to her necklace, twisting it nervously. She searched the room, desperate for lies, but found none. Even the aunts who used to fawn over her were quiet now, their admiration dimmed by the raw weight of the truth. The investor cleared his throat. If I may, he said, looking directly at Claudia, your sister is one of the most formidable businesswomen in the world. She's respected in every boardroom she walks into. And if you had half the sense to recognize her value sooner, maybe you wouldn't be standing here looking so foolish. Claudia flinched as though struck. Her pride was collapsing in front of everyone, her identity crumbling like sand. For a woman who lived off appearances, off the praise and envy of others, this was worse than any punishment I could have devised. I straightened, my voice calm but final. You mocked me at our mother's funeral, Claudia. You tried to humiliate me in the one place we should have stood side by side. But here's the truth, you've been living in my shadow all along. You just never realized it. Her lips trembled. For the first time in my life, I saw tears welling in her eyes. But they weren't tears of grief for our mother. They were for herself, for the humiliation, the exposure, the loss of control. And I felt nothing, no guilt, no satisfaction. Just a strange, hollow peace because I wasn't speaking for revenge. I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for myself, for the girl who once sketched dresses in the margins of her notebooks, who was laughed at and overlooked, who carried Claudia's cruel words like weights around her neck. That girl had finally been freed. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, slowly, one by one, the relatives began to drift away, murmuring excuses, unwilling to linger in Claudia's wreckage. She stood alone, her glittering dress suddenly looking cheap under the fluorescent lights, and I walked away. Not triumphant, not smug just finished, because nothing more needed to be said. The church hall emptied slowly. the hum of whispered gossip trailing behind each departing guest. By the time the last of the coffee urns were packed away, only a few stragglers remained, and Claudia stood frozen in the corner, her glittering dress wilting around her like a flower left too long in the sun. I didn't wait for her. I didn't need to dot as I walked toward the exit. I caught fragments of hushed voices. Can you believe it? All this time? She built Montreve? Incredible. For once, the whispers weren't about Claudia. They were about me. But I didn't bask in them. I let them wash over me and fade. Outside, the evening air was crisp, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. I breathed in deep, the first true breath I'd taken all day. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the overlooked sibling, the family's afterthought. I felt seen. Not by them, but by myself. Behind me, the doors banged open. Claudia's heels clicked against the pavement, fast and frantic. "Wait," she called. Her voice cracked, sharp with panic. "You can't just walk away after dropping something like that." I turned slowly, hands folded in front of me, my expression calm. "Why not?" she faltered, words tumbling over themselves. Because you can't keep this from me. I'm your sister. If you really built all of this empire then I deserve to be part of it." Her desperation clung to the night air like static. I shook my head. "You deserve nothing, Claudia. Not after the way you've treated me. Not after today?" Her eyes glistened with tears, but they weren't born of remorse. They were born of fear. Fear of losing her pedestal. Fear of being irrelevant. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You can't just leave me behind. You don't know how hard it is to—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice low, firm. "Don't stand there in designer heels I made and tell me about hardship. You've never struggled a day in your life. You've never worked for anything beyond the next rich man to pay your bills. Meanwhile, I've been building something bigger than either of us ever dreamed." She flinched, her chin quivering. "I didn't know," she whispered. "If I'd known, I never would have—" "You never asked," I said simply. "You never cared enough to see me, to see what I was doing. You only ever cared about yourself?" Her tears spilled then, streaking her flawless makeup. She reached out, fingers trembling. "Please, let me in. I can change. I can help you. We could be unstoppable together." For a brief moment, I studied her, the sister I had grown up with. The girl who once tied ribbons in her hair and bossed me around our childhood bedroom. The woman who had spent her entire life chasing approval, status, attention. There was a time I might have wanted her by my side. A time I might have mistaken her desperation for love, but that time had long passed. I stepped back. "No, Claudia, I don't need you. And honestly, I never did." Her hand dropped, the final piece of her facade crumbling. She stood there in the fading light, mascara smudged, dress glittering weakly under the street lamps. For once she wasn't radiant. She was just small. I turned and walked away. Each step felt lighter, freer, as if I were shedding not just grief, but decades of shadows she had cast over me. In the weeks that followed, the story rippled through the family like wildfire. Some relatives reached out, embarrassed at how they had treated me. Others stayed silent, too proud to admit they had been wrong. It didn't matter. I didn't need their validation any more than I needed Claudia's, and Claudia. She tried, of course. She sent messages, left voicemails, even showed up once at my office lobby in a borrowed dress, begging for a meeting. My assistant turned her away. Eventually, her voice grew quiet. I heard later that she spun her own version of events, that I had betrayed her, that I had stolen the family spotlight. But no one listened. People had seen the truth with their own eyes. As for me, I returned to my work, to the empire I had built stitch by stitch, mistake by mistake, triumph by triumph. And I carried Mom's voice with me every day. "You'll find your own way." She had been right. I had found my way, and I didn't need Claudia's approval, or anyone else's, to walk it. And so, the sister who mocked me for polyester at our mother's funeral faded into the background of my life, while the one she thought would never amount to anything, walked forward, clothed not in labels, but in everything I had built with my own two hands.